Recording in progress.
Put in my camera. Okay. Happy 2026, everyone. Hope everyone had a wonderful New Year's. And now it's the new year, new goals, new expectations. And I'm super excited to be having our first official contract class. We're going to dive into the lease listing agreements. We've been getting a lot of questions regarding lease disclosures, how to submit agreements, lease, month to month, and obviously the list agreement is going to be the conversation we're going to be having today. I'm going to go through the motions with all of the new changes that have transpired from last year. There's additional advisories and disclosures when you fill out the listing agreement, which is the LL form. It also provides you with additional advisories. I'm going to go into dive deep and dissect, some of the most important elements, and more so the most important aspect of it is your commissions, right? The commission is the most important thing when navigating a lease listing, right? It's no difference than listing a property for the purchase of, for the reason of selling the property, right? Listing, get a buyer, and you go through the motion. A lease is just kind of similar, but ultimately it's a little different as well, meaning that you're not selling it, you're just trying to find and identify a tenant that will ultimately be renting it on either on month to month or on a 1 year lease or whatever modifications in between, 12 months and, month to month. So let's go ahead and dive into the conversation. It is being recorded and it will also be provided at the YouTube channel that we have through KW Shares. All right, so the lease agreement is an exclusive authorized to lease or rent, right? Car form LL. Going through the basic information, the data preparation is the date that you create this form. The exclusive right, this is who the individual that is giving you the authorization to start marketing the property for the purpose of finding, identifying, screening a qualified tenant, right? The rental property owner, better known as an RPO, okay? When I reference RPO, that's a owner, right? A landlord that owns that piece of real estate. In this case, I use 1642 249th Street Place LLC as an example. Okay, I just pulled it out as an example. It can be a entity, a trust, a corporation, an LLC, or it can be individual, John Smith, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith as well, who has employed. Okay, so in this case, let me change this and I'll put Keller Williams as the listing agent. Okay. So Keller Williams Realty is the listing broker that is giving us authorization and to employ and grant us the opportunity to start marketing the property again for the focus of finding a qualified tenant. All right, date that it begins. Okay, this is the date that you will start marketing the property, either if it's a specific date or a future date, then that's where you're going to put. So in this instance, we're going to say that the date will start tomorrow, January 3rd, 2026. And let's say it's a 6 months listing, right? So then we'll go January to June, and we'll do the same thing that it will expire on June 3rd, 2026. Okay. The exclusive right to lease, rent the property, which is situated in the city of Harbor City, the county of Los Angeles, as described as 1642 to 49 Place in Harbor City, as an example. That's going to be the physical address of the subject property. Okay. 1 second here. Hold on 1 second. I have to submit a request here real quick. I apologize. Give me 1 second, folks. I'm getting this done. Okay, sorry about that. I had to do a quick DocuSign, guys. First, first hire for 2026. Okay. Then the listing terms. This is the information on what the terms of the landlord, what they're requesting as part of the process. Okay. So here is the amount. In this case, the property in question is going to be renting for 8,500. It's going to be on a month-to-month basis. Okay. The security deposit. Okay, that's what the landlord is requesting as part of the opportunity to rent this location. In this instance, the cap would be usually the amount of the first rent, typically as security deposit. So it can vary from situations. Sometimes I've seen a lot less deposit, but it cannot be more than 1 month's rent. It should be the security deposit. Okay. Now, part of the process here, folks, that I want you to understand and be very diligent on is that there's additional advisories that are included as part of the lease listing agreement, right? You're going to see language in here that says SDDA for more information regarding allowable amounts prior to, right? Because I've seen in the past, especially with all of the issues that have transpired with the fires last year and in around this time, you know, a lot of owners were taking advantage of the situation and were, hiking up the rent, where saw it double, even triple the amount that was at one point in time a lot less, right? So uh, remember, there is tenant rights just as much as there's landlord rights as well. But because we live in a very sensitive state, and I'll put it at that, in certain cities have very stringent requirements, we have to be very careful that we follow the rules and regulations when it comes to security deposits. Tenant type of tenancy. Okay, this is if it's going to be either a month to month, 1 year, or other. You do have the modifications available to you if you're interested in, say, maybe a short term lease, which is less than 12 months. But for today's class, we're putting a 1 year. So, when you're drafting this agreement, be clear on what the expectations of your client's wishes are, right? Typically, it's either 1 year or month to month, depending on the circumstances. Section 2D goes into items included in the lease. All fixtures, fittings attached to the premises, and the following items of personal property. Okay, so what items are included as part? This is where you're going to put what is included, so that way there's clear, concise understanding that everyone on the that is renting the place is on the same page with the landlord. In this case, I put refrigerator, washer, and dryer as an example, right? Maybe there's a power charge for like electric vehicles, right? That the owner is leaving, or maybe the previous tenant had an electric vehicle. Um, usually they take it, but let's just say that they do leave it, and now you just plan to leave it there. So what you're emphasizing is to the new tenant is, hey, these are some of the items that are included as part of the lease. Okay, they may not have an electric vehicle, but I'm just saying it as an example. Section E talks about personal property that will not be maintained or replaced by the owner. Okay, so this is an opportunity if there is anything on here that the landlord wishes to divulge and disclose, that these are items that are on the property but will not be maintained by the owner or landlord, right? So this is your opportunity to really get crystal clear on what that looks like. Okay. In this instance, you can write whatever it is that the owner is requesting to put there as part of their position. And that way, you as the listing agent and the landlord are both on the same page. And more so when you're doing the lease agreement month to month in terms and conditions, the tenant in questions will know exactly that these items are the responsibility of the tenant to cure, fix, or replace. Items included for lease, if there's a garage or a carport, again, it's pretty self-explanatory. If there's a garage, obviously you're going to check it. Okay, if it's a carport, maybe put in, okay, it's carport 200. If it's a condo or a townhome, maybe they have specific carports and designated units for that, right? Then you'll put in that information on there. Additional terms, again, if there's anything in addition to some of the terms already established, then you can add those additional terms on there that will give your client the understanding that we're both on the same page, right? This is again why it's important for all of you when you're having a conversation with the landlord is to be very clear and concise of what their wishes are, right? And ask a lot of questions so that way when you do present this lease listing agreement for their signature, they're both on the same page with you and says, okay, everything looks good. We're going to go ahead and initial and sign and execute it. And that gives you the opportunity now to, start marketing the property. Okay. Any questions so far? Let's see. No questions. We're good. All right. Let's continue. All right. Compensation. This is the section of how you get paid. This is how you get paid for services rendered, right? So remember, all commissions is not fixed, okay? It's set by each broker individually and may be negotiable, right? As long as both you and the landlord are in agreement, then you're good to go, right? What is typical? What is norm? Well, whatever you agree. What we've seen in the past typically is, now that compensation, right? Compensation, good morning. Compensation is not put for the agent representing the tenant here. No difference than the listing agreement. There is no cooperating compensation paid out to the buyer's agent. Now that is all part of this new regulations that they have to submit the application with also in respect what their compensation is. Remember, just as a buyer representation agreement of the RBC, there's a tenant representation agreement that a agent representing a tenant also must fill out because the tenant is responsible to pay the agent compensation. Now, there's language on there that says that the landlord can pay you as the agent representing the tenant compensation, and then that credits the tenant from their obligations to pay you what both you and the tenant agree to. Okay, so no difference than the purchase agreement when you're doing the buyer representation agreement. Okay, in this instance, I'm charging 3% of the compensation, and it says total rent payable due under the terms specified in paragraph 2C. So if you go back to 2C, okay, we did a 1 year, right, and it's 8,500. So if you do the math here, okay, if you do the math, you're going to do it as what it states: 8,500 times 12 months. That's $102,000 of revenue that the owner is receiving in a 12-month period, right? So out of that 102, you get a percentage of the revenue that comes in that first year of the tenant renting. So if you do the arithmetic and the math on it, on $102,000 of revenue, again, that's based on 8,500 monthly rent times 12 gives you 102. Then you times that by 3%. That gives you $3,060. That would be the income commission paid to you. Okay. Does that make sense? Everyone clear on that? Okay. Typically, that's how we do the math on how we get paid for compensation. It's usually the year income. And I'll get this quite often, Simon. What if the amount is month to month, right? No difference. Okay. If it's month to month or a lease, it's still the same thing. If it's 8,000 month to month, it's still going to generate the same income 12 months typically we are charging for the whole entire year, right? The other question I get to quite often is, what about if we secure more than 1 year, right? What if it's a 2 year agreement instead of a 3 year, right? Now, this is a discretion, and I've seen arguments over this. Am I entitled to get paid for the additional agreement, right? Because I'm securing, right? Not just 1 year, but I'm securing 2 years or even 3 years, right? And we see this quite often in the commercial realm, but not necessarily in the residential. I personally, okay, would not recommend to do a lease more than a year. Okay, because you just never know if you're going to have good tenants or bad tenants, right? And if you have bad tenants and you secure a 2 year agreement, then the landlord is typically stuck with this individual or individuals for 2 years, right? And it may not be a good experience, right? So you want to keep it a minimum of 1 year, but if it does happen to be more than 2 years, can you charge additional income for that? Typically, yes, but the owner may not want to pay you all up front. They may say, I will pay you, right, the first year, okay, once we secure that tenant in place. And then after that 11th month, if we do get where the tenant is ready to renew one more time, then I will pay you at that time the remainder, right? But the problem with that is we're expecting compensation in the future, right? So what's the reinsurance that will collect that amount? And then on the flip side, think about it this way too, right? Because the argument is, Simon, well, why can't we collect the rent now for the 2 years? I get it. But see, the essence is what sets this situation and scenario a little different is this is not a sale, right? It's not like the seller is getting the proceeds from the sale and then that's how you get paid compensation. We are hoping that this tenant becomes a good tenant. We're hoping that this tenant will, continue their lease agreement beyond the 12 months. But what if something happens 6 months, 7 months down the line where unexpected they have to terminate their agency agreement with the landlord, right? And that can happen. So from a landlord standpoint, they may not be comfortable to pay you for 2 years because that's, double of what they're paying you. 3,060, that's 6,000, $6,000 in change, right? So it really just depends on the circumstances and the situation. I would encourage you that if you're having conversations with the landlord, it's always best to do month to month because the beautiful thing is that if there's mutual understanding and there's a situation where it's just not working out, at least the tenant or the landlord, can put in, a request for termination of agency after the 1 year. Okay.
Simon, good morning. Quick
Yes.
question for you. I'm still not clear on that month-to-month arrangement. How do you get paid for that one? Do you get monthly, or you get one lump sum for a whole year? What if the person doesn't stay there for 1 year?
So, okay. So let's just say for the sake of argument, you're doing a 1 year lease, right? Typically, when the tenant is ready to execute the lease agreement, right, you're gonna request the first and the security deposit, and also including is all of the commissions. Typically, you'll break it down, and I'll show you as we go through this lease agreement, or excuse me, listing agreement. And then on a future date, we're also going through the actual lease agreement, where now it breaks it down of exactly what the compensation is going to be and who is going to be paying you. Is it the tenant that is going to be writing two different or three different checks, one for the seller, or excuse me, one for the landlord, one for the listing agent, and one for their agency who is representing the tenant, right? So it may be three, or it can be one check, okay, that is being paid out to the landlord, and then the landlord would distribute. If there's two agents involved, then the landlord would be giving us two checks, one for the tenant's agent and one for you as the listing agent. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's how you get paid. All right, so let's continue. So if there's any additional stuff other than the 3% here, then you can put on possession or in preventing from the RPO or any flat fee. So it can be a percentage, or it can also be a flat fee too as well. And I've seen on the MLS where you know you're going through the listings and then you see a property that meets your client's criteria, right? Then you go and show the property, they fall in love with it, you submit an application, and then now they submit a counter that says it's not a percentage, it's going to be just a flat fee that you're collecting, right? And I've seen, a few $100s, $500 I've seen too as well, and sometimes even $100, depending on the company that's marketing the property. I've seen like property managers put like a flat fee as well. So, this is why we try to encourage you not to do really much lease listings and leases, is because it doesn't really pay much, right? But you got to look at it the bigger picture, right? Because those tenants may in the future become future buyers, and if they like your services, and I see it across the board quite often, where the tenant eventually does decide to buy, and because you gave great service, they're more entitled to use you when they're ready to purchase a property. So there's benefits of actually servicing, tenants and landlords too. And on the flip side too, by leasing a property as well, we don't know what the future holds for the landlord. They may decide to sell this property, may do a 1031 exchange because they're looking to buy a multi-family home from a single family residence or a condo. And you might be the agent representing them on the sale too as well. So again, there's pros and cons to that as well. All right, same thing for number two. If it's a month to month, if it's a percentage, flat fee, or any additional fees here. Section B is similar to the listing agreement. It does have a continuous right to compensation. So I typically put 120 days. What does that mean? So if you and the landlord mutually decide to cancel, or the listing expires, right? Then you put what's called a clause on there that says that if anyone has either saw the property, submitted an application, or started the initial a lease agreement but decided to cancel, they come back after the listing expires or cancels within 120 days, then you're entitled to compensation. That's really what it means. Okay. So it's an additional protection as a listing agent that allows you, and that number can vary. I've seen 30 days, I've seen 60 days, 90 days. I put 120, which is 4 months. It has to be reasonable too, because obviously the landlord will have to sign and execute this. And if they question it, they have every right to say, look, I won't do 120 days, but I'll do 90 days. So anything after that 90 days or 120 days, then you're not entitled to compensation. Okay, the next one is interference with the listing agent. This is if the owner, right? If without the broker's written consent, the premise are withdrawn from the lease, rental or lease rented, or otherwise transferred or made unmarketable by a volunteer act by the owner during the listing period or an extension, basically means that, you still would be responsible to go through the due diligence process. But if the owner doesn't make it easy, right? They withdraw it, they make every avenue or excuses, right? You may still be entitled to compensation, right? Because you have the rights to the listing, and because this is an exclusive lease listing agreement, there nothing on here technically says that the landlord can just cancel unilaterally because they just changed their mind. Okay. Especially if you put a lot of time, effort, and energy, marketing costs as well, you might be able to ask for marketing expenses to cancel, or we just withdraw it until the listing becomes an expired, right? Let's say you have a 6-month lease listing agreement, and then 3 months in, the landlord decides to not not market the property anymore, right? But because we had a 6-month agreement, we can withdraw it, meaning we still have every rights to it. If at any point the landlord decides to remarket the property, then we just put it back to active, but we retain the rights, meaning that the landlord cannot just go with another agent and assume that they can just put the property on the market, because we still have the rights to a withdrawal. It's only when we cancel it, then they're open to use any real estate company or agent. All right, we're going now into page number 2, the tenant breach and recovery of damage. Okay, so what this language goes into, it really talks about if the tenant breaches, right? And it says that the renter is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the owner, then compensation which otherwise would have been earned under paragraph 3B shall be payable only if and when the owner collects damages by a suit, arbitration, settlement, or otherwise, then in any amount equal to the lesser of 1/2 of the damage recovered or the above compensation after first deducting the expenses of collection, if any. So basically what this is if the owner receives some type of compensation from a breach of the tenant, right? So let's say that the tenant goes through the motions, right? And then we get everything secure. We go through every aspect, and the tenant is well qualified to rent this place. We collect the secure deposit, and now the tenant decides not to move forward, right? And we went through all of the elements to get us to this position, and now the tenant has, their rights, to not continue, but there's repercussions regarding that, and the landlord can definitely seek a breach of contract and ultimately collect damages. What this says is that if the owner is going to receive compensation from this, then we, as a real estate professional, can get 1/2 of the damage recovered, not the whole, but also we can argue that as well. Hey, put a lot of time, effort, and energy on this. I'm still entitled to my 3%, depending on the situation. Remember, because you want to keep this client as a future client, right? In the future, if they ever decide to, sell the property. So you got to kind of give and take with this, right? And not be too much of a hard head and ultimately lose the listing, because that can happen, right? If you're too strong into wanting to collect, compensation. The beautiful thing is, you're still the listing agent. You put the property back on the market and then find another qualified tenant to rent the place. Additional compensation. Again, it's a discretion. I just use a TC fee. If you're using TC and there's a TC fee, you can ask the owner to pay you an additional fee to help offset the cost that you pay your TC, right? So if the 3% is $3,060, and let's say that the TC fee to do leases is $50, $75, whatever that amount is, you can ask the landlord to pay you the additional cost to offset the fee that you're paying your transaction coordinator. Okay. Selection of compensation. Broker may retain compensation due from any move-in payment made by the tenant to broker pursuant to the lease. A broker is authorized to instruct tenant to deduct that amount of the broker compensation. Just a disclaimer of collection of compensation. So section F, and I would encourage you to always check this, okay, because you just never know, right? Section F goes into compensation of sequential sale to tenant, okay? So let's just say in the future, the tenant becomes and wants to buy the property, and that can happen, right? The tenants become owners. So if that's the case, what you're telling the landlord is, hey, if the tenant decides in the future and you decide to sell this property, then I want to be compensated for services to help navigate that sale. So what the section says is the owner agrees to pay broker if the tenant directly or indirectly inquires or enters into an agreement to acquire title to premise or any part thereafter whether by sale, exchange, or otherwise during the term of the extension of tenancy, compensation is equal to 3% of the selling price or total consideration. And said transfer, whichever is greater, does not include compensation, if any, to a broker representing the tenant. Payment is due upon tenant's direct or indirect acquisition of any legal, equitable interest in the premise, and if there's an escrow. Okay, so typically, this is a good um, uh, paragraph, in my opinion, is because sometimes you'll never know, right? You may be the lease listing agent and be done, and the tenant lives there for 3 years. Then the owner makes a deal with the tenant saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm ready to retire. I'm leaving California, and I'm going to put the property on the market, but I'm giving you the first right of refusal. If you're interested, this is the price that I want to sell the property, and if you want it, I'll give you the first bid on it before I put it up in the open market." Well, the tenant being established for 3 years likes the place, make their home. They don't have to do any major moving because they live in the place. They may start the initial process to purchase the property, right? So again, looking at some of the pros and cons in this, you may be entitled to compensation if you do put, a section here that says, or check, I should say, compensation of sequential sale to tenant. But also there's a expiration date on this as well, right? So, you want to be very clear is that, it cannot be a lifetime situation, meaning that the tenant lives there for 10, 15 years, and now the owner sells the property to the tenant 10, 15 years from now. That's not the way it works. There has to be, an expiration date that if any time during this time the tenant does end up buying the place, then you should be entitled to compensation. And the owner has to agree to it, right? Because sometimes tenants don't plan to move out temporarily, or stay there temporarily, and decide this is a home that they love. It's good because of the school systems, maybe work and all that, and this is the reason they'll decide to buy it in the future, right? So in essence, what you're telling the landlord is, hey, you know what, if this tenant within a certain period of time they do decide to purchase it and you do sell it to the tenant, then I'm able to collect compensation of and that amount again is all negotiable, 3% as well.
Time,
Additional compensation, yes.
what do you feel is a appropriate period of time for you to ask for compensation in that situation?
It Yeah, good question. It varies anywhere from maybe 3 years to maybe 5 years. If that tenant does decide, and again, the owner has to agree to it. They may say, no, that's just too long, or they may say, look, as much as I want to, I already have an established agent that is going to, if I ever decide, I've already promised that agent, right, the opportunity to list the property. All you're doing is just putting that, and if they decide otherwise, then you can negotiate on that as well, right? But this is a great paragraph here that allows you an opportunity if that tenant becomes the owner or decides to purchase the property, then you can definitely collect compensation for that reason, right? And it's very far and few. Not too many tenants end up buying the property. But if you're one of those lucky ones that they do, that something drastic changes in the owner where they have to sell, then yeah, you might be entitled to be involved in the sale of this transaction as well.
So I'm assuming there's no date on this agreement to codify that. Should we like put it on the side or something like that? Like,
That's
here's
correct.
the time period and have them initial that or something like that on the side?
That's correct. So if you look at the section where it says during the term or extension of tenancy, okay, compensation equal. So meaning that based on this information that we have up here, right, will dictate, and again, it's the lease, because if you're not clear, there's loopholes to it. But if you're clear and you put additional terms, right, then I would put something so that way everyone is on the same page. Because there is no specific language that says that, for the entirety of the tenant. Because what if this tenant lives there for 10, 15 years, right? Are you entitled to compensation if that now tenant becomes a purchaser? So there has to be certain restrictions on that. But here it is. If you do put it in writing, saying that if the tenant in, from now, 5 years from now, if they end up buying this property, then you can represent them as a buyer, or represent the seller as a seller, or you can represent both of them mutually in helping them navigate the transaction. Then you can put that language that says to the landlord saying, hey, if this tenant does stay here for 5 years and you do decide to sell the property within that 5 years, then I want to be involved in that transaction and get paid additional compensation. Nowhere in this agreement says that, but you can do an addendum that adds to the listing agreement, says that if that happens, then you're involved in the transaction and ultimately get paid for it. Does that make sense? Does
It
that
does.
answer your question?
It does. Is there
Okay.
some kind of boilerplate language that we could use for that addendum, or we have to everybody creates
No,
their
there
own?
is no boiler point, but if you want to send me an email, I can definitely provide you with language that you can incorporate into this agreement if you want to have that language on there for these type of situations. Now, again, it has to be agreed upon by the landlord, right? If I'm a landlord and you're presenting this, I might question it and says, okay, tell me a little bit more of what you're explaining here, of what you're trying to accomplish, right? And you're going to articulate the conversation and says, well, if the tenant, lives here more than that 1 year, and let's say that they live here within a 5 year period, um, you decide to sell the property to the tenant, and the buyer, or excuse me, the tenant decides to purchase it, and you guys go into it. I want to be involved in that, or at least be compensated for that. Okay. The owner would have to be in agreement to it, because obviously it'll be through the seller's proceeds that you're collecting compensation. Now, more so, the owner or landlord may say, no, 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 I already have, someone. Let's strike that and let's remove it from the contract. Or they may be okay, because maybe they know that that may not happen, right? And let's just say, as an example, that the landlord has owned this property for 25 years. And in those 25 years, 20 tenants have lived there, right? So it's always been a cycle of people. But you never know, it doesn't hurt to add that additional language on there, um, as an avenue to collect, additional compensation if the tenant who you might have represented, okay, because let's just say on the flip side, right, that tenant had another agent involved, right? Well, that agent can also put language in there and says, hey, if you end up buying a property, or this particular property, I want to be the agent representing you on that, right? So in essence, it depends, they may not want you to represent, but you may still represent the owner, right? And now it's a negotiating term. And at that point, maybe the owner may not feel very comfortable to put anything on a future agreement in line. They may say, look, we can definitely explore that if that ever happens, but what's the likelihood that's going to happen, right? But here it just gives you, a position that within that time period, you might be entitled to some type of compensation. But send me an email. I'll be more than happy to draft a bullet point language that you can use to incorporate that into this agreement.
Thanks.
All right. So compensation obligations to other RPOs. So owner warns that the owner has no obligation to pay. So here's just basically saying, if you're picking this up from a lease expiration, right? You happen to call and they had it listed before, never got rented out. Now you're involved in this. What they're saying here is that, hey, that anyone on this list here, brokerage, name tenants, whoever, If they are on this list, then and they come back, then you may not be entitled to compensation. Compensation obligations to tenant broker. So the tenant pays. So here is kind of a breakdown when you're having the conversation with the landlord. The following are due and payable. So this is how the breakdown of how the owner, unless otherwise specified, right? The first month's rent to broker due at execution upon possession or other. Security deposit, meaning not the money that's going to you, but how all the money will be distributed. Is it going to come to me? Then ultimately, Keller Williams will send out a check to the owner. You want to, as far as you want to be involved in that, you should have the tenant directly to the landlord, right? So it just kind of gives you a segment of what that looks like on the payment. First month's rent, you're not going to check to the broker. It's going to go right to the owner, right? And then you can. So I would not check this, but I would check at execution. Okay, so at execution or upon possession or otherwise, then the first month's rent will go directly to the RPO. Okay, this is only on certain circumstances where the RPO is asking you to collect the money. Maybe they're on vacation, they're out of the country, they may not be back for 30 days or more, but you want to execute this, then you would be responsible for that. But I would say don't get involved, have the money go directly, or have the tenant wire the money to as well to the landlord, the RPO. And that goes again for security deposit or any other additional stuff. Section B talks about, direct deposit. Okay, so if check, the owner permits the tenant to pay rent by direct deposit, such as wires, electric payments, online methods. So there's many ways, right? Zelle, I've seen Zelle. Most of my tenants pay me by Zelle, believe it or not. And I'm okay. The money goes immediately into the account, and then, the account gets credited, and then the mortgage gets paid. Depending on how your client wants and wishes to collect income on the rent is perfectly fine, right? Or they may just have them direct. Many years ago when I used to rent, the owner gave me their account information, so I would go to the bank or I would do a wire transfer of my account to the owner's account, and that's how I would have paid the rent each and every month. 5 goes into key safe and lockbox. If check, the owner is authorizing the use of a lockbox. So if that's the case, then you would check that. If they're requesting a sign, if check, the owner is authorizing broker to install a for lease sign on the premises. Multiple listing service, pretty self-explanatory. If it is, then you will not check this. It says information about the listing will be provided on the multiple listing service, the MLS. Broker selection, if not, then the MLS rules may require an exclusive form such as the MLCSA form by submitting. So it just basically goes into the motions and the understanding. Is the owner allowing you to put it on the MLS? And that's basically what it's saying. Okay. Security insurance, broker is not responsible for loss of any damage or personal or real property or personal, whether attribute to the use of a lockbox. So basically it's a disclaimer and disclosure. Look, we're going to do our very best to make sure we protect and prevent any issues with the property when we list it. But we're also disclaiming that we're not responsible for it. So it's a disclaimer that says, look, you're still responsible. We're going to do any and all to protect it. But, if something does end up happening, then we as a brokerage are not responsible for any loss or damage to personal or even real property, right? Ownership and title, basically the same thing, that the owner warrants that they are the owner and have the authorization to be able to lease the property. So it basically just puts a disclaimer on there that says if the person or entity has title to the premise and has the authority to execute the agreement. So really what it is, hey, I have the authorization on behalf of the property to lease out this property. So I'm giving the agent the authorization to do so. Pro representation goes into the owner represents that unless otherwise specified in writing is unaware of any notice. So basically that they shall tell you that if there is any notice of default, any issues regarding a foreclosure or anything that may ultimately jeopardize the tenant, that they have to divulge that information, right? And maybe they're curing it as we're trying to get because they need the income and the revenue from it, but they have to also disclose that to us as well. Okay. The next is tax withholding and reporting. Okay. So what this is here is basically tax withholding. The California withholds if the owner is not a California resident or a corporation qualified to conduct business in California, the owner authorized broker to withhold and transmit California franchise. Again, it has that disclaimer, but most likely I've never really seen any brokerage withhold any income for the sake of paying taxes. This is a whole different situation, but this is again for anyone outside of California. By that time, they should hire obviously a property manager, right, that handles this, and then they'll provide all of the documentations and income and revenues and monthly statements when it comes to all this stuff. And that goes for federal as well. Now 12 goes into the duties and responsibility as a agent representing the landlord on this. Pretty self-explanatory, nothing severely concerning. It's just really a protection that allows you and the landlord to be on the same page and understanding, right? That the broker agrees to exercise reasonable efforts and due diligence in achieving the goal, right? Is to find and identify a qualified tenant, right? That you're going to do everything to market the property on the multiple listing service. Pro disclosures agrees to complete that, part of this new regulation is no difference than a transfer disclosure, a SPQ. If the owner has any disclosures that they must divulge, right, then there is this new form, the RPOD form. It's kind of a TDS, but it's a kind of a TDS for tenants and landlords to both be on the same page. The owner will say, hey, here's some stuff that I'm disclosing to you, and the tenant is in agreements to it. And that's part of this agreement that we'll show you shortly. Owner good faith. Okay, the agrees to consider offers presented by the broker and act in good faith to accomplish the lease or rental of the premises by, among the things, making the premises available, right? So pretty self-explanatory that says, hey, you know what? You're giving me the authorization to list the property. You're going to give me the authorization to be able to showcase the property and do anything necessary for me to find a qualified tenant to rent the place. Section D is a very important argument that protects us, and it's basically identifying us, right? So the owner agrees to identify and defend and hold harmless the broker and all parties and broker firm as permitted by law from all costs, expenses, suits, claims, liabilities, damage, judgments, and claims of every type, including but not limited to those arising out of an injury or death of a person. So what I like about this is basically we're cleaning our hands, but we're also disclosing by signing this, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, we're basically, you're not going to sue us, right? If something happens, if someone gets hurt, if someone unfortunately passes away, right? And I'll give you a prime example. Many years ago, an agent, what had happened? The agent represented the tenant. And the agent went to go show a condominium that had stairs. Well, they noticed that on the stairs going down was dark and the light was very dim. And it was really hard to see. But you could see that the light would turn on, but it was still very dark as you go downstairs, right? And I think it was going down to the garage. Well, apparently the husband slipped and fell and paralyzed from the neck down. it was an unforeseen circumstance and very sad. He was just about to retire, and unfortunately had this terrible, horrible incident, and he became paralyzed, right? So because of that, years of back and forth, but ultimately, the that party ended up suing the owners, right? Because they had very poor lighting. But the listing agent and the agent are our agents, because we had this, were not included in that lawsuit. Because that's a protection for us. We have no control over that. Now, proactively as an agent, right? Your job is to be diligent of situations like this, right? And if you see something of hazard, then you want to reference it on the MLS. You want to reference it on putting a sign. Hey, be careful as you're going down the steps. The lights are very low. Have cautions, right? And if you put all that into place, then it even gives you more additional protection, because you just never know if these individuals are going to get hurt. And now they're wanting to go after a potential lawsuit. 13 goes into the agency relationship. Again, part of all of the duties and responsibility, the do's and don'ts of what you as an agent, okay, what you're capable of doing, and obviously not go above and beyond your scope of work, right? So it's really the agency disclosure, the possible due agency agreement, and any other disclosures is what you're providing both the owner, and obviously as part of the tenant too, there's disclosures that the tenant will be signing as well. Termination of agency relationship. Owner acknowledges and agrees that unless the owner and the broker enter into a separate property management agreement, broker will now represent the owner in managing. Okay. So again, as a company, we do not have errors and omissions insurance to run property management. The only way that you can do a property management is if you work for a property management, they have their own entity insurance, or if you're a broker and you have your own E&O insurance and your own DBA separate than Keller Williams. If you're named and the company is named that you were involved in property management, then you're responsible for the full deductible or any additional damage, because you may not be able to be represented by our errors and omissions insurance. And as part of your ICA agreement, when you sign up with any offices, usually they put a disclaimer there that no property management or mortgages you'll be doing without the proper license as well, right? Now you can represent yourself if you're the owner of your own properties, right? If you have multiple properties, then yes, you can manage and property manage your own properties, but you cannot property manage for the purpose of compensation. So what it says here is basically, look, we'll help you lease it, we'll help you market it, but that's where we finish, right? You would have to hire anyone that does property management, or if you're able to, then obviously if you're a broker, or if you work for a company that allows you, then you can go ahead and delegate it that way. Attorney fees, disputes, pretty self-explanatory. Any resolutions, if there's a disagreement, then obviously mediation or arbitration. 16 is kind of similar to all of the other agreements, management approval, that a salesperson or broker associate enters into any of the agreement. We have compliance that will red flag any of the agreements, and if there's something that we just don't feel comfortable with, we have 5 calendar days to execute and either have the right to cancel this agreement. Okay, so for the agents that think they can do whatever they want, we have compliance that overlooks that and then sends me an email saying, hey, there's something a little strange about this agreement. Take a look at it. And if I feel that it may be a position of compromise or potential liability, then we as a company have the right to cancel the listing. We're not going to agree to it. Unfortunately, this is just a lease listing that we're not going to take. All properties are equal housing opportunities. With the rise of Section 8 vouchers, you got to be very, very careful. You got to treat everyone equally. We've seen a huge spike in lawsuits regarding Section 8. So if you do get a call, if you're the listing agent on this and you get a call, hey, do you accept Section 8? The answer should always be, yeah, we accept all applications. Okay. Don't go into it. I don't think so. The seller won't. I don't believe they do. Any of that will compromise your position, and ultimately you'll end up getting a letter from an attorney firm stating the fact that you've been sued. So be very, very mindful and careful. Anything that sounds suspicious, they're trying to trap you. There's a lot of ambulance attorneys out there that are looking for those opportunities and have decoy tenants that are just calling all of these listing properties and asking, do you accept Section 8? Do you accept Section 8? Be very careful with that, because again, it's going to compromise and it's a trap. Make sure that you always say that we accept all applications, right? And then they go through the qualification process, right? It's based on income, credit, work history, references. There's many ways that you can decline an application based on qualifications, not necessarily because they're a Section 8 applicant, because there's a lot of good people that do have Section 8, and they just need that additional help by the government to do so. And I've seen many property owners that have nothing but good things for Section 8, but it all really depends, right? And if a landlord tells you, or owner says, hey, we do not accept Section 8, you're going to jot it down, but you cannot say to the owner that you're going to say no. He says, we have to accept all applications. They just have to go through the vetting process, right? Because if they're adamant and they're pushing you, right, and then when this hits the fan, they're going to point fingers at you and saying, well, it's his fault, it's her fault that I'm in this lawsuit, and they may drag you into potential lawsuit. So be very careful. Keep it neutral. And sometimes if the landlord just is very adamant, then it may be to your best interest not to take this listing. Just say, look, I might not be the best agent for this. We wish you the very best, but I have to decline this and not take the listing. And sometimes the best. Remember, listings at this level of leases, it's very, very few of income that you can make on them, right? So it's not really worth it, because the deductibles on an E&O insurance are substantially pricey sometimes, and you just don't want to be in a situation where it compromises, and now we have to get the E&O involved. So be mindful of that. Time of essence. Remember, everything that we do is all about efficiency and time of essence. Don't drag it, because then that compromises the ability to collect compensation. Legally authorized signers, obviously, they have the right to review all of these documentations, and within that period of 3 days of execution, they may include something in there that they were not aware, right? So it's a position of negotiations, it's a position of having a conversation, but it also who is the authorized person to legally be able to sign these agreements. The last part of it here is the entity. If it's a trust, corporation, LLC, if it's a probate, then you would include the representative capacity form and who's the authorized to sign. Then all of the information here is pretty self-explanatory. And real quick, before we finish off, just a couple of things that I want to disclose. So here's the rental property owner disclosure. This is like the TDS for regular sales. It's intended to be provided with the lease, listing, or property management agreement, right? It's called the RPOD form, right? And it's just disclosures, okay? What it goes into, it just says, hey, owner, are you aware that the property was constructed prior to 78? Yes or no? Okay. Does the owner have any reports, records pertaining to lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard in the premises? Yes or no? Okay. Meth contaminations, right? If there was any, so it goes into a lot of the things that the owner should be aware of, right? Pest control, water, submeters, any mold, asbestos, homeowners association, condo planning and development. And again, are you aware? If you're aware, then yes. If you're not, then no. Okay. Any other material facts that may affect the desirability for the tenant to live in the property, right? Death on the premises, right? It says that if a occupant died on the premise within the last 3 years, the 3 years of when we executed this agreement, then the landlord would have to divulge and disclose that. The next one is the rental property owner's advisory. Okay, so it's basically a form that is now included as part of the disclosures, right? And this came in effect last year in June of 2025. Limitations and ability to set the rent rate in eviction tenant, local rent and eviction control. So it's a disclaimer that says, hey, Mr. Owner of the property, with everything that's going on, the state of California has tenant protections, TPA. And here are some of the civil codes that you can reference and do a little bit of due diligence before you sign this rent agreement, right? Because again, it may ultimately come back to bite you, right? It talks about rent caps, just cause. Okay. There's certain things that, just because the owner decides to sell the property, right? You cannot literally just evict someone or say, hey, I'm giving you notice. There's certain criterias, and I would encourage all of you to read all of this. And in future classes, I will be talking about, kind of a breakdown of what the rent caps, the just cause, and how to manage and navigate those conversations. Okay. I'm not going to go too much into the breakdown here just for the sake of time. But again, it's part of your responsibility to do your due diligence and read this, because you're now explaining this. And if a landlord has questions, you got to be able to know how to navigate the conversation. Okay, so return to tenant. California law requires that the housing provider notify the tenant and the tenants by giving them an opportunity to repair damages to the property prior to termination of the tenancies. Pictures of properties. Beginning April of last year, housing providers must, at the end of a tenancy, take pictures of the property after possession and return, but prior to repairs be made, and take pictures of the property after completion. So now, as part of the due diligence process, you have to take before and after pictures as well. That way, full transparency, protects you as a landlord, saying, hey, this is what we had. And now they're claiming otherwise, that there was some damage. No, it was already there, as you can see from the original photos. Screening fees, pretty self-explanatory. Housing provider disclosures, we've already talked. Tenant rent payment reporting. Again, this is for the tenants that are asking for positive rent to be reported to the 3 bureaus. Now, if it's a small establishment like a single family, a duplex, triplex, fourplex, then it doesn't make sense, because there is additional cost. But if it's a big, large company, such as, a big, 50, 100 unit, they may have the ability to report that as part of it. That's something between the property management and the tenant, that they can use the rental income that they're paying on time to be reported to the 3 bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, as an example, where now it shows that they're paying their $8,000 monthly. It helps with their FICO score, but it also, because they're paying on time, it helps to build that score. But it also can be a drawback too as well, because if you're late, they have the right to report late, and now that can impact your FICO score as well too. So there's pros and cons to it. Talks about pets and all that fun stuff, fair housing, as we talked about, utilities, elevated wood balconies and disclosures, legal tax consequences, termination of agreements. So it's pretty self-explanatory. And then the fair housing, again, it's something that the owners need to be aware. This is part of their advisories that they have to sign as well. that, they will not discriminate based on age, citizenship, color, ancestors, genders, marital status, religion, so on and so forth, mental, it goes on and on and on and on. So I would encourage you again just to read all this and what the requirements to comply with the fair housing laws, right? So let's see here. And then I think last but not least is the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory and disclosures, right? CCPA and all that fun stuff. So that pretty much concludes our lease listing agreements. Any final questions before we close out?
I had a handful. I don't know if you want me to email them to you or fire away.
Yeah, why don't you email them to me and I'll be more than happy to address them that way. You have my email, correct?
I do.
Wonderful.
Simon, hi, this is Susan. So the questions that the gentleman Emmanuel asked, can you also send those out so that we will benefit from the information provided?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want, just send them over to me and then I'll be more than happy to address them. And then Suzanne, if you want, just send me an email requesting. That way I'll remember to send you the questions and then, the response to that.
Good deal. Thank you.
Simon,
Awesome.
are all those forms in a bundle or we have to add
Yes.
them separately?
No, that's all part of the bundle. So all of the stuff, when you go on the lease listing agreement, it already includes all of the forms that I just illustrated.
Got it.
Cool. All right, team. Well, that was our first contract class for 2026. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for being. The recording will be uploaded to our KW Shares YouTube channel. So if you ever want to check it out in the future, by all means do so. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. It's Simon Cazares at kw.com. First name, last name at kw.com with any additional questions. And be looking out for additional classes this month. I'm going to be really just diving into leases, just because we've seen a lot of questions and uncertainty with leases. So I thought I would start the year and the month with lease disclosures and documentations. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on the next contract class.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.